Hey guys, tonight we step into the soft, gaslit haze of Victorian London, a place where the streets gleam damp with drizzle. The carriages rattle over cobblestones, and the fog wraps around every lamppost like a living thing. You can almost smell the coal smoke on the air, hear the distant clop of horses, the whistle of a night constable, and the faint hum of a city that never truly sleeps. It's here, at 221B Baker Street, that the faint scratch of a violin begins to play. A restless, elegant sound that floats out into the night like a dream half remembered. You push open the door, and the warmth of the fireplace greets you. The smell of tobacco and old books fills the room. There's a man in a dressing gown, thin and sharp as a blade, crouched over a microscope. His eyes flick up, not to greet you, but to evaluate you. This is the world's only consulting detective. And tonight, you're about to follow him into a maze of logic, crime, and quiet madness. Of course, if you tried to live his life, you'd be dead by morning. The sleepless nights, the questionable meals, the toxic experiments in the corner. It's a wonder he hasn't already blown up the flat or poisoned himself accidentally. But for now, you're safe. You have a chair, a cup of tea, and a mystery about to unfold. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love for you to comment your location and the local time where you're listening right now. Because somewhere, someone might be drifting to sleep under their own stormy sky. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's early evening when a knock rattles the door of Baker Street. Mrs. Hudson peers in first, her apron still dusted with flour, and announces a visitor. Nervous young man, hat in hand, eyes darting like a hunted rabbit. Holmes doesn't even glance up from the chemical test he's running. He says simply, "Show him in." The young man steps inside, dripping rainwater onto the rug. "Mr. Holmes," he stammers. "It's about my employer, Mr. Phelps. He's vanished, simply vanished, from the city office." Holmes sighs, finally sets down his pipette, and leans back. "Vanished entirely. That's most inconvenient of him." You can't help but smile. Watson rolls his eyes. But within seconds, the air in the room changes. Holmes begins his questions, rapid, surgical, merciless. He's not merely listening, he's dissecting. Every pause, every tremor, every wrinkle of the man's sleeve is a paragraph to be read. The story spills out. A routine evening at a bank near the Strand. A clerk named Phelps, known for punctuality, was seen leaving for home around 10. The next morning, his office door was found locked from the inside. His papers were undisturbed, the window slightly open, and muddy footprints led up to it. And stopped. No sign of struggle, no missing money. Just absence. Holmes is already pacing. He picks up his magnifying glass, muttering, "Footprints that lead nowhere are the best kind. They tell us the destination isn't where the eye expects." Within an hour, you're in a hansom cab rattling through the London fog. The gas lamps streak past like faint comets. Holmes sits across from you, silent, fingers steepled. You've learned not to interrupt him in this state. His mind is moving faster than speech can follow. When the cab stops, you're at the bank itself. A narrow building hemmed between a tailor's shop and a tobacconist. Inside, the smell of ink and brass fills the air. The night guard shows you the office. Papers still stacked neatly. A teacup, cold. The faint trace of boot marks drying on the carpet. Holmes kneels, producing his magnifier. "Soft-soled shoes," he murmurs. "No heels. Interesting. Likely a clerk or a cautious thief. But look here, see this ash? He touches a gray smear near the desk. Not pipe tobacco, cigar ash. Light brown, fine texture, trichinopoly, rolled in Madras. A rare choice for Londoners. You blink. How could you possibly know that? He glances up with that faint, smug glimmer. Because, my dear friend, I once cataloged 140 varieties of ash by microscope. It pays to have hobbies. Outside, the wind howls, shaking the windows. The constable passes, his lantern swaying, casting restless shadows on the walls. Holmes leans against the window frame, eyes distant. The footprints lead to the sill, yes. But note the faint scrape here on the brass latch. Someone climbed out, not in and not alone. That night, the two of you follow the trail into the rain-slicked alley behind the bank. The ground squelches underfoot. The smell of horse dung and wet stone thick in the air. A stray cat hisses and vanishes into the dark. Holmes's lantern beam catches something glinting near a drain. A cufflink engraved with a peculiar symbol. 2 crossed keys. Ah, he whispers. Now we are in business. The next morning, Holmes's flat is an orchestra of chaos. Maps spread across the floor, newspapers pinned to the wall, chemical beakers bubbling like restless ghosts. You help him trace the symbol, eventually linking it to a small locksmith guild rumored to do private commissions for the less honest sort of gentlemen. By afternoon, you're deep in the slums of Clerkenwell, where chimney smoke curls low and the cobbles stink of gin. A locksmith named Mullins opens his door with trembling fingers. Holmes flashes the cufflink. Your work, I believe? The man stares at it too long. Then the tremor in his voice gives him away. I only made it, sir. Didn't know what for. Holmes steps closer. Who for? The man hesitates, then whispers, a fellow they call Crowder. Works the docks. Big man. Walks with a limp. Holmes nods. A limp, but soft-soled shoes. Fascinating contradiction. You find Crowder 2 nights later in a tavern on the Thames. The smell of ale and salt thick in the air. He's enormous, face half hidden under a cap. And when Holmes slides into the seat beside him, you swear the temperature drops. Good evening, Holmes says cheerfully. I see you've been avoiding banks lately. Crowder freezes. Then his hand darts for his coat. But Holmes is faster. He knocks a small pistol from the man's grip with his cane. The room goes silent. Only the fire crackles. Holmes speaks softly. Mr. Crowder, you left your employer's cufflink behind. And I'm quite sure the missing clerk would have appreciated that detail had he lived to see it. The man's shoulders slump. He ain't dead. He's in the river warehouse, tied up. We just wanted the papers. And that's how, an hour later, you find yourself cutting through damp ropes to free a shivering clerk from a pile of crates. While Holmes examines the stolen documents, government bonds worth a small fortune. When you return to Baker Street, Holmes tosses the recovered papers onto his desk and says, almost absently, you see, my dear friend, the footprints led nowhere because they were never meant to lead at all. They were a misdirection. The real path was through the lock, not the door. You sip your tea, still shivering from the cold. And how did you know Crowder wasn't a murderer? Holmes gives that faint, knowing smile. Because murder requires imagination. And Crowder was a man of routine. One can smell the difference. You laugh, but deep down, you're unsettled. There's something uncanny about how Holmes dances between science and sorcery. His logic is flawless, yet his insight feels supernatural. As the night wanes, Holmes settles back into his chair, lighting a fresh pipe. The smoke curls upward like a ghost. You mustn't romanticize deduction, he murmurs. It's a science like any other. Cold, predictable. Rather boring, actually. You glance around the cluttered room, The violin propped in a corner, chemical bottles half full, notes scrawled across scraps of newspaper. And you can't help thinking there's nothing boring about this man. Still, beneath his brilliance, there's an emptiness. A silence that hums louder than the city outside. You realize Holmes isn't chasing criminals for justice or fame. He's chasing something far more elusive. The thrill of knowing what others cannot. The high of being the only one awake in a sleeping world. Historians still debate whether this case, the so-called vanished clerk affair, was ever real. Some suggest Conan Doyle adapted it from newspaper clippings. Others believe it was a reconstruction of several unsolved crimes. But perhaps that's the beauty of it. The line between fact and fiction, between Holmes and history, has always been fog-shrouded, like London itself. You watch as the detective's eyes drift to the window. Rain taps gently against the glass. Somewhere below, a carriage passes. Holmes whispers, almost to himself. The game is never truly over, only paused. And as you settle back in your chair, feeling the warmth of the fire and the drowsy hum of London in the distance, you can't help thinking he's right. There will always be another knock at the door, another mystery waiting in the mist. The next morning begins with the smell of burnt toast and a faint, persistent tapping. Holmes's violin bow hitting the side of a test tube rack as he stares intently into a small dish of crimson powder. You're still half asleep, trying to butter your toast without losing it to the edge of yesterday's newspaper, when Holmes mutters, "Blood, my dear friend," a question as old as guilt itself. He gestures toward the sample, then toward you. A farmer's son might tell you the color of it, a surgeon its purpose, but what of proof? How does one prove a stain is human blood and not that of an ox? The world has waited for such certainty, and at last, he grins suddenly, wild and childlike. At last, I believe I have it. Before you can respond, the door bursts open. A uniformed officer stands breathless, cap in hand. "Mr. Holmes, sir. Scotland Yard requests your immediate assistance. There's been a murder," and the word Raish written on the wall, in blood. Holmes's eyes light up. "Raish," he repeats softly, German for revenge. And yet, one suspects it's a little too convenient, don't you think? You hardly finish your tea before being whisked into the swirling fog of London's dawn. The hansom cab rattles through narrow streets, slick with rain, the wheels cutting through puddles that reflect a dull orange glow from the gas lamps above. Holmes sits opposite you, hat low, tapping one gloved finger against his knee in perfect rhythm with the clatter of hooves. You can tell his mind is already miles ahead, reconstructing the scene before ever seeing it. The house in Brixton Road is quiet when you arrive. A ring of curious onlookers gathers outside, a cluster of shawled women whispering, newsboys craning their necks for a glimpse. Inside, the constable guides you through a hall lined with faded wallpaper into a small drawing room. A man lies sprawled in the center of the floor. His eyes are open wide, staring upward as if frozen mid-revelation. No wound visible, no sign of struggle. Just that single word scrawled in red letters on the wall. Raish. Holmes drops to his knees immediately, ignoring everyone. He moves like a surgeon at work, measured, detached. He sniffs the dead man's lips, peers at his fingernails, studies the floorboards. "No blood at the scene," he murmurs. "No weapon." And yet, he leans closer. See the ring of moisture on the table? The smell of candle wax and cheap perfume. He was not alone. Inspector Lestrade arrives moments later, puffed up and pleased with himself. "German radicals, no doubt," he declares. "The writing proves it. Likely revenge against one of their own." Holmes gives a small, almost pitying smile. "If you wish to prove it, my dear Lestrade." You'll find the culprit in the next room. The inspector snorts. You've only just arrived. Holmes doesn't answer. He's already moving toward the doorway, eyes fixed on something invisible to the rest of you. He kneels again, fingertips brushing the carpet. The footprints, he whispers. 2 sets, one broad and heavy, one slight, feminine. The lady left first. The man followed. And note the length of the stride. It shortens halfway across the room. A stumble. Poison, perhaps. Ah, yes. A trace of powder on the nail. Excellent. He straightens, turning toward the door. Send for the cabman who brought the victim here. Lestrade glares but complies. Minutes later, a nervous driver steps inside, cap twisting in his hands. Holmes's gaze lands on him like a net. You drove a gentleman to this house earlier tonight, did you not? Yes, sir. Picked him up near Euston. American by his accent. Nice enough fellow, though. He coughed the whole way. Ah. Holmes steps closer, eyes narrowing. And did you return here after dropping him off? The cabman hesitates, then glances toward the door. I might have, sir. Left something behind. Holmes nods slowly. Indeed, you left a second passenger. And before anyone can react, Holmes darts forward, pulling back the driver's sleeve to reveal a small smear of crimson powder, the same chemical trace he'd found at the scene. The man freezes. His eyes flick toward the window. But it's too late. Lestrade's men close in. Later that night, as you sit in Baker Street once more, Holmes pours 2 glasses of brandy. The rain still falls outside, but softer now. A lullaby for the city. A lover's quarrel, he explains quietly. The lady was deceived. Her suitor betrayed. The word rake was not meant as a message, but as misdirection, a German word chosen to mislead. Revenge, yes, but not political. Merely human. You nod slowly, watching the flames dance in the hearth. And the poison? Extract of strophanthus, he replies. Common in certain colonies. Rare here. The man carried it himself, perhaps intending to use it on another. Instead, it ended him. There's poetry in that, don't you think? He leans back, eyes half-lidded. It's always the details, Watson, or you, as I should say. The small things no one sees, a footprint, a smudge, a ring on a table. The truth hides in corners, whispering to those patient enough to listen. Outside, a church bell tolls. Somewhere far off, a whistle cuts through the night air. A reminder that London's vast machinery of life keeps turning. Crime, grief, hope, all moving in their endless rhythm. Holmes stands and reaches for his violin. The case is closed, he says softly. But the music never ends. As he plays, the notes shimmer through the fog. You close your eyes, and the story of a study in scarlet unfurls in your mind like an old photograph come to life. 2 men. One brilliant, one burdened. Meeting for the first time and discovering, by chance, a partnership that would outlast even death. Scholars still argue over whether Holmes was inspired by a real person. Some claim he's an echo of Dr. Joseph Bell, Conan Doyle's mentor at Edinburgh University, a surgeon who could diagnose a patient's occupation from the dirt on their shoes. Others say he's a mosaic of Victorian archetypes, the rationalist, the skeptic, the man who finds order in chaos. But whatever his origin, Holmes feels real in a way most myths never do. He breathes through the fog of the city, restless and sharp, half scientist, half poet. As the melody drifts into a slower, more wistful tone, you realize you're watching something rare. A man at peace. For once, Holmes's fingers move not in calculation, but in grace. The sound fills the room like smoke. Soft, spiraling, uncatchable. It's the sound of thought without words. And just when you think the night might finally settle, there's another knock at the door. Holmes doesn't stop playing. "You might open it," he murmurs. Our next act in this little drama has arrived. You obey, and standing there in the hall is a young woman wrapped in a heavy cloak, her gloved hands trembling. "Mr. Holmes," she whispers. I think someone is following me." Holmes lowers the bow, eyes sharpening again. "Excellent," he says almost cheerfully. "Then we shall begin anew." You exhale, half in disbelief, half in anticipation. So much for rest, so much for peace. The city doesn't sleep, and neither, it seems, does the world's only consulting detective. As the fire crackles and the rain turns to mist against the window, you find yourself smiling despite the hour. Because somehow, deep down, you know, this is exactly where you're meant to be. Holmes glances at you, the faintest smirk on his lips. "My dear friend," he says, "I hope you haven't any early appointments. We're going to be busy for quite some time." You look at him, at the violin, at the casebook waiting on the desk, and you realize that this, right here, is the beginning of everything. The first study, the first scarlet thread in the great tapestry of mystery that will stretch across decades, continents, and dreams. Outside, the fog swirls thicker. Somewhere, a bell chimes twice, and you, ever faithful companion to a restless genius, step once more into the shadows, ready to follow wherever his mind leads. The fire crackles low as dawn seeps through the fog, a pale gray light spilling across Baker Street. You've barely had time to breathe since the events of Brixton Road, and already Holmes is a silhouette of motion, sorting chemical vials, tuning his violin, jotting notes in that small leather book he never lets you read. For a man who claims to be bored easily, he never truly stops. You, on the other hand, are halfway through your second cup of coffee when Mrs. Hudson enters with the Morning Post and a faintly scandalized expression. "Another young lady to see you, Mr. Holmes," she says, setting down the tray. "And I do hope this one doesn't faint like the last." Holmes's head lifts slightly. Send her in." Moments later, a figure appears in the doorway. A woman in her 20s, graceful but visibly anxious. Her eyes are sharp, darting between you and Holmes. She carries herself like someone accustomed to attention, but unused to danger. "My name is Mary Morstan," she says, voice soft yet steady. "And I've come about a most peculiar letter." Holmes gestures for her to sit, folding his long fingers under his chin. You can tell at once he's interested. Not romantically, no, but intellectually. The kind of interest he reserves for intricate locks and unsolved ciphers. She continues. 10 years ago, my father, Captain Morstan, vanished the night he returned from India. Since then, every year on the same date, I receive a small box containing a single pearl. No name, no message, nothing but the pearl. You feel a chill crawl up your spine. Holmes, of course, looks delighted. "How exquisite," he murmurs. "An annual token, precise to the day. There's something mathematical in that." "Continue." "This morning," Mary says, "I received a letter. It requests that I meet the sender tonight, under the condition that I bring 2 companions I can trust." She hesitates, her eyes meeting yours for just a moment. "I thought of you, Mr. Holmes. And you, sir, since you were mentioned in the papers." You can't help but smile awkwardly. Holmes, however, is already on his feet, pacing. A rendezvous of pearls, secrecy, and arithmetic timing. He mutters. It smells faintly of treasure and deceit. He stops, turns toward the window. "Watson, you will accompany Miss Morstan. Dress warmly. The night promises intrigue." Hours later, the fog has thickened into a milky blanket over the Thames. You, Holmes, and Miss Morstan wait beneath the shadow of a lamppost, its light diffused into a soft golden halo. A cab approaches, its driver masked by scarf and hat. He stops before you and says, "If you're for the appointment, step inside. But I'll ask you to keep the blinds down." Holmes nods calmly. Anonymity is always the preface to revelation. The ride is long, and the silence feels longer. You can hear the clatter of wheels, the slow lap of river water somewhere close. Then, the cab halts. A door opens. "This way," the driver says. You follow through a small gate into a dimly lit garden, then up a narrow stair. A servant opens a door, and suddenly you're in a sitting room filled with warmth and the scent of tobacco. A short man rises from his chair. His skin is darkened by years under tropical sun, his hair prematurely white. But it's his eyes that catch you, bright, restless, almost feverish. "Good evening," he says. "I am Thaddeus Sholto." He motions you towards seats, his hands trembling with excitement. "You must forgive the secrecy. I am a man pursued by both guilt and fortune. But tonight, I intend to right an old wrong." Holmes leans forward slightly. "We are listening." Sholto's story spills out in waves. Years ago, his father and Captain Morstan had served in India. There, they discovered a hidden treasure, the Agra hoard, belonging to a native prince. They made a pact with 2 other men to smuggle it back to England. But when they did, greed tore them apart. One of the 4 was murdered, another imprisoned. The treasure vanished. On his deathbed, Sholto's father confessed the secret to his sons. But before they could retrieve the hoard, Captain Morstan arrived to demand his share. In the ensuing argument, he collapsed. Dead of a heart attack, perhaps, or something worse. Fearing scandal, the elder Sholto hid the body and concealed the treasure again. He died years later, leaving Thaddeus and his brother Bartholomew each half of a secret map. "Tonight," Thaddeus explains, "the treasure will finally be unearthed." You glance at Miss Morstan. Her hands are folded tightly in her lap, the pearls glinting faintly at her throat. "And you believe the letter came from your brother?" she asks. Thaddeus shakes his head. "I cannot be sure. But he has found something at Pondicherry Lodge, something he claims will astonish the world." Holmes rises, reaching for his coat. "Then we mustn't keep him waiting." Pondicherry Lodge sits like a silent fortress on the outskirts of Norwood, its gates high, its windows black. Even the wind seems hesitant to pass through. Holmes rings twice before a servant appears, pale and shaken. "Dr. Watson," he blurts, "you're a medical man. Come quickly. Mr. Bartholomew. He's been found dead." The room beyond smells of metal and decay. Bartholomew Sholto lies slumped against his desk, his face contorted in a grotesque mask of surprise. Around his neck is a small thorn, still wet with poison. Holmes kneels immediately. "Ah, the Andaman dart," he murmurs. "Dipped in curare, most likely. And note, one footprint on the sill, small and bare. The other, deep and heavy, a wooden peg." He glances up at you. A one-legged man and a companion of smaller stature. Curious partnership. The treasure chest, when opened, is empty. Only the smell of damp wood remains. Holmes straightens, eyes gleaming. "The sign of 4, he whispers. That phrase becomes the pulse of the next 2 days. The rhythm that drives you through the maze of London's underworld. Holmes moves like a machine, chasing clues through opium dens, dockside taverns, and the narrow, stinking alleys of Lambeth. Everywhere, the same whispers. A man with a wooden leg, a strange islander with dart and blowpipe, a launch stolen from the riverfront. At last, Holmes secures the help of Toby, a hound with a nose so keen it might as well have been trained by Holmes himself. You follow through the night, the lantern swaying, Toby's tail wagging as he leads the way down the riverbank, past warehouses and weeping willows, to the water's edge. There, Holmes crouches, running his fingers over the mud. "Tar," he says. "From a launch recently caulked. They're on the river." That night, the pursuit becomes a fever dream. You board a police launch under the command of Inspector Athelney Jones, the fog rolling thick around the prow. The Thames glows faintly in the moonlight, reflecting the lantern's pale flame. Holmes stands at the bow, his coat whipping in the wind, eyes fixed on the horizon. Suddenly, the dog barks. A dark shape moves ahead. "There," Jones shouts. "That's the Aurora." The chase begins. The engines roar. The two boats surge forward through the mist, the gap closing. You see them now. A hulking man with a wooden leg, working the tiller. And beside him, a tiny figure, his dark face streaked with paint, a dart pipe raised to his lips. "Down," Holmes shouts, pulling you aside just as a dart hisses past your ear. It embeds itself in the mast, quivering like an accusation. The police return fire. The islander collapses soundlessly. The one-legged man throws up his hands, shouting over the roar of water. "It wasn't my fault. I kept my promise. The treasure cursed us all. Moments later, it's over." The launch drifts, the fog swallowing the last echo of gunfire. Holmes steps aboard, silent, composed, as though the chase were merely an experiment reaching its conclusion. He finds the chest quickly, half buried under canvas. When opened, it's empty once again, just shards of wood and dust. Holmes stares at it for a long moment, then closes the lid gently. "You see, my dear friend," he murmurs, "the true treasure was never meant to be found, only pursued. That's how men lose themselves, not by greed, but by the chase." Back at Baker Street, the fire burns low. Miss Morstan sits quietly, her pearls catching the faint light. Holmes paces the room, pipe in hand. "The jewels were lost overboard," he explains. "The thief's dying act, the curse fulfilled. And yet, in their loss, perhaps there is mercy." You nod slowly. "Mercy?" He smiles faintly. "Yes. Wealth breeds shadows. Without it, perhaps those poor souls may finally rest. For a long while, the only sound is the crackle of the hearth. Outside, London breathes its endless breath. Omnivorous, indifferent, alive." Holmes sinks into his chair, closing his eyes. "It is curious," he says softly. "Treasure, vengeance, love, they are the same in essence. Addictive substances of the soul." You glance at Mary, who is watching him with a kind of quiet wonder. You wonder, not for the first time, what it must feel like to see the world so clearly, and yet remain apart from it. Historians still puzzle over how much of the Sign of Four reflected true colonial history. The Agra treasure itself mirrors real lootings from India's princely states. Some even argue Conan Doyle wrote it as a veiled critique of empire, wrapped in the glitter of adventure. Others say he simply wanted to thrill the reader with poisoned darts and foggy rivers. But somewhere between fact and fiction lies truth. A truth Holmes himself might have approved of. That every empire hides its crimes in locked boxes, and every box will one day be opened. You lean back, letting the warmth of the fire ease through your bones. Holmes reaches for his violin again, playing something low and haunting, a tune that sounds almost like regret. The melody drifts into the night, over the rooftops, into the fog, across the sleeping city. And as your eyes grow heavy, you realize this is what peace looks like. In the world of Sherlock Holmes, brief, fleeting, and always one knock away from breaking. It's well past midnight when you find yourself once again at 221B Baker Street. The scent of smoke and violin resin hanging like a ghost in the air. Outside, the wind hisses through the chimney flues, carrying the soft, distant toll of St. Marilybone's clock. Inside, Holmes paces barefoot across the carpet, his dressing gown fluttering like the robe of some sleepless monk. He hasn't spoken in an hour. Only the rhythmic click-click of his pipe against the mantelpiece punctuates the silence. You've seen this before. His mind caught in that strange, quiet tension that precedes a storm. At last, he stops, glances toward you, and says, "Watson, have you ever heard of Dr. Roylott of Stoke Moran?" You shake your head. "Ah," he smiles faintly. "Then you're about to meet a specimen worth your attention. A man of ferocious temper, an unfortunate inheritance, and, if my instincts are correct, a murder so subtle it may well have hissed. Before you can ask what he means, there's a knock. Firm, deliberate. A pause, then another knock. Softer this time, like the sound of nerves hiding beneath courage. "Come in," Holmes calls. The door opens, and a young woman steps through, pale as morning fog. Her clothes are modest, her eyes wide with fatigue. She clutches her gloves tightly in trembling hands. "Mr. Holmes," she whispers, "my name is Helen Stoner. I am in fear of my life." Holmes gestures for her to sit, his tone suddenly gentle. "You have done wisely to come here, Miss Stoner. Now, tell us everything." And she does. Her tale spills out in uneven breaths. She and her twin sister lived with their stepfather, Dr. Grimesby Roylott, at the family estate of Stoke Moran. A cruel and violent man, Roylott had returned from years in India with both wealth and rage. He kept strange pets, a cheetah, a baboon, and treated the servants as prisoners. 2 years earlier, Helen's sister Julia had announced her engagement. But 2 weeks before her wedding, she died suddenly in her room. Her face twisted in agony, no mark upon her. Helen remembers her final words before she collapsed. It was the band. The Speckled band. Holmes leans forward, eyes narrowing. "Speckled band, you say? Curious phrase. Continue." "Now," Helen explains, she herself is engaged. Yet her stepfather has insisted she move into her sister's old room, directly beside his. Since doing so, she has heard strange noises at night. A low metallic clang, a soft whistle, and a faint movement in the walls. Holmes rises, the case already taking shape behind his eyes. "Watson," he says briskly, "pack your revolver and toothbrush. We leave for Stoke Moran at once." The train rumbles through the gray morning, cutting across fields veiled in mist. Holmes sits opposite you, reading the details of the Roylott estate from a folded newspaper clipping. "Former physician," he murmurs. "Charged with assault, yet released for lack of evidence. Once struck a blacksmith senseless for laughing. Keeps exotic animals for amusement. Remarkable restraint, considering his temperament." You glance out the window. The countryside slips past like a dream. Hedgerows, cattle, distant smoke. The calm before the inevitable when you arrive at Stoke Moran. The estate looks half alive, half decayed. The mansion crouches amid tangled weeds, ivy crawling up its crumbling walls. Somewhere inside, a baboon screams. A sound so sudden and raw, it turns your stomach. Helen greets you at the gate, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "He's away in town," she whispers. "You can examine the rooms now, but please be quick." Holmes moves with silent precision, inspecting Julia's old room. His magnifying glass glides over every surface. The bell rope hanging from the ceiling. The ventilator connecting to Dr. Roylott's chamber next door. The bed bolted firmly to the floor. He crouches beside the bell pull, tugs gently. It doesn't ring. "Curious," he murmurs. a rope that calls no one, an event that leads not outside, but directly into the room of a violent man who sleeps beside a safe and keeps venomous pets. You feel a chill that has nothing to do with the cold. Holmes replaces the rope carefully. Come, Watson. We shall return tonight. Bring your revolver and your courage. Night falls heavy. You slip back into the room with Holmes, carrying a lantern shaded in blue paper. Helen has gone to sleep elsewhere, trembling but resolute. Holmes closes the shutters, locks the door, and motions you toward the bed. Sit still, he whispers. Do not speak. Whatever happens, do not strike at random. The hours crawl. The air feels thick, unmoving. You can hear every creak of the old house, every sigh of the wind through the chimney. Holmes sits rigid in the darkness, eyes fixed on the ventilator. Then at last, it comes. A faint, rhythmic hiss, almost delicate. A soft whistling note that seems to coil through the air. Holmes springs up, whip in hand, strikes the bell pull sharply. Something small and pale falls from it, a flicker of motion, and vanishes back through the vent with a sibilant shriek. Holmes seizes your arm. Quickly, you rush next door. The sight freezes you where you stand. Dr. Roylott lies in his chair, face purple, eyes bulging. Around his neck is wound a creature of nightmare. A snake, thick and spotted, its body twitching in death throes. Holmes snatches a poker, flings it away into the safe, and slams the door. The speckled band, he breathes. The deadliest snake in India. He trained it to crawl through the vent, down the rope, across the bed, to strike on command. When I lashed it, it turned upon him instead. Justice in its most efficient form. You can barely speak. But how could anyone think of such a thing? Holmes looks down at the body, expression unreadable. Because greed breeds ingenuity. And fear, my dear friend, breeds art. Back at Baker Street the next evening, you still can't shake the image of the snake. The sound of its hiss seems to follow you through your thoughts. Holmes, meanwhile, is as calm as ever, immersed in his violin. When he finally speaks, it's almost as if he's talking to himself. Do you know, Watson, I often find the simplest crimes to be the most frightening. No elaborate machinery of theft or deceit, just a single man, alone with his hatred, inventing cruelty from imagination. He pauses, lowers the bow. And yet, had we not seen the creature with our own eyes, who would have believed it? Even Lestrade would have laughed. Historians still argue whether the Speckled band was inspired by any real Victorian case. Some scholars trace it to a rumored 19th century murder in India involving a trained cobra. Others insist Doyle invented the tale whole, borrowing bits from colonial gossip and medical journals. But you know better. You were there, in the hush of that darkened room, the hiss slithering closer, your pulse hammering in your ears. Whether myth or truth, it felt real enough to stay with you forever. Holmes lights his pipe, the match flare briefly illuminating his face. There's something about the serpent, he muses. Old as Eden, coiled in every man's heart. Perhaps that's why it frightens us so. You sit back, listening to the rain begin again outside, the eternal rhythm of London life. Cases come and go, but the city's heartbeat never falters. Somewhere out there, you know, another story is already stirring. Holmes glances toward the window, as if sensing it too. Do you hear it, Watson? The quiet between storms. That's where truth hides. He smiles faintly, returning to his violin. The melody this time is softer, mournful, curling upward like smoke into the rafters. And as the last note fades, you find your eyelids growing heavy. The fog presses gently against the glass, and the fire dwindles to embers. For now, at least, London can sleep. But not for long, because somewhere, In another parlor, another letter is being written. One that will find its way to Baker Street soon enough, bringing with it another tale, another whisper, another thread in the tapestry of mystery. And when it comes, you know exactly how Holmes will greet it. With that same thin smile and the words that seem to summon all adventure. The game, my dear Watson, is afoot. The next few weeks drift by in the half-dream rhythm that always follows a major case. London hums outside like an endless machine, trams grinding, vendors calling, rain sliding down iron gutters. And inside 221B Baker Street, life shrinks again to its quiet orbit. The clatter of test tubes, the scrape of violin strings, the soft sigh of pipe smoke rising into the dim ceiling. You think Holmes might finally rest. But peace never lingers long with him. It's only the silence before the next page turns. It's dawn when a frantic pounding wakes you. You stumble out, half-buttoned vest, to find a man at the door, pale, disheveled, one hand wrapped in a blood-stained handkerchief. His eyes, wide and glassy, find Holmes instantly. "Mr. Holmes, you must help me. They took my thumb." The words hang there absurdly, almost comically, until he unwraps the cloth and shows you the jagged stump where his thumb once was. Holmes, unflinching, gestures him inside. "Ah," he murmurs. "The engineer's thumb. A rare condition, but curable with attention. Sit down, Mr. Hatherley. Victor Hatherley," the man gasps. "Hydraulic engineer. I was hired last night for private work. I should never have gone." Holmes pours him brandy and listens. The story spills out in fits and starts. A strange man had called on him the previous evening. Tall, pale, with dark glasses and an oddly mechanical calm. He offered double the usual rate if Hatherley would come that very night to inspect a faulty press in a workshop outside Reading. The condition, complete secrecy, Hatherley agreed. He was young, ambitious, too polite to refuse. At midnight, they met at the station. A carriage took them miles through fog and hedgerows until they reached a lonely house, its windows shuttered, a faint chemical odor in the air. Inside waited another figure, a woman, silent, frightened, her eyes pleading though she said nothing. "She tried to warn me," Hatherley whispers. "I know she did, but I was a fool." He'd been shown to a cellar where a massive hydraulic press stood gleaming under lamplight. His employer claimed it was used for pressing fuller's earth, a powder used in cleaning wool. But the machinery was far too powerful for that purpose. Hatherley bent to inspect the valve and noticed, beneath the press, a smear of reddish powder that looked nothing like clay. When he looked up, the man was watching him too closely. "You have seen enough, Mr. Hatherley," he said. Then came a sudden roar, the hiss of steam, the blur of metal descending. Hatherley leapt aside, thrust his hand out instinctively, and the press caught him by the thumb. "I fainted," he says. "When I woke, I was outside, crawling toward the road. My hand gone." Holmes has listened without a single interruption. Now he rises, eyes glittering. A hydraulic press powerful enough to crush bone instantly. Fuller's earth as camouflage. And the lady, the lady. There's always one honest soul in a den of rogues. He snatches his coat from the hook. "Watson, fetch your revolver. We're going to Reading." The train whistles through the morning fog. The countryside blurs past in muted greens and browns, the sky a dull pewter. Hatherley sits opposite, pale and shaken. Holmes, meanwhile, is absorbed in a map of Berkshire, muttering calculations under his breath. Industrial chemistry, he muses. The manufacture of counterfeit coinage, perhaps. The press to mint false sovereigns. And the thumb, collateral damage in a machine designed for greed. You reach Reading by noon, hire a trap, and drive out to the address. The road twists through endless fields before ending abruptly at a cluster of smoking ruins. The house, what's left of it, still smolders. Walls blackened, roof collapsed. The smell of burnt oil and acid choking the air. Holmes steps down, surveying the wreckage. Someone tidying up, Watson. The best way to erase a factory of lies is to set it alight. You find the press amid the debris. A twisted carcass of steel, its piston fused from heat. Nearby, half buried in ash, lies a small metal disc stamped with a crude royal insignia. Holmes pockets it without a word. There were at least 2 men, he says softly. The mastermind, the enforcer, and the girl, poor creature, used as decoy. They fled, but not far. He kneels, brushing soot aside until his fingers close on something tiny. A fragment of glass with a peculiar curve. He holds it to the light. Spectacle lens, he murmurs. And not common, smoked, to protect sensitive eyes. Our pale employer's vanity will undo him yet. You ride back into town by dusk. By midnight, Holmes has already traced the order for such lenses to a London optician who recalls a client, Colonel Lysander Stark, purchasing them just last week. The name, of course, is false. But by dawn, the man himself is found in a lodging house near Euston Station, unconscious from burns sustained while escaping the fire. His companion, the silent woman, is gone. Holmes says nothing as the police carry Stark away. Only later, over tea, does he finally speak. The woman saved him, you know. She fired the furnace to destroy their work and forced him out before it consumed them both. A strange mercy. You nod. And Hatherley? He'll live, Holmes says. Though he may find that life costs a thumb more than gold could ever buy. That evening, you sit together in the glow of the hearth. The city beyond the window hums like a living organism. Omnivorous, unsleeping, always hungry for stories. Holmes, in one of his rare moods of quiet reflection, turns his gaze toward you. It is odd, Watson. Men kill for diamonds, for pearls, for paper stamped with ink. Yet I have seen greater madness in men who kill for curiosity. He taps his pipe thoughtfully. This engineer's tale, for instance. It was never about wealth alone. The true thrill for our Colonel Stark was secrecy. The game of building something monstrous under the world's nose. Power disguised as work. You sip your tea watching the shadows flicker. You sound almost sympathetic. Not sympathetic, he replies softly. Merely aware. The human mind is a labyrinth. When men lose themselves inside it, I cannot help admiring the architecture. The violin rests against his knee. He plucks a few quiet notes, slow, uncertain. Outside, a hansom rattles past. Somewhere, a church bell tolls the hour. And for a moment, the flat feels suspended between worlds, the rationale and the irrational, invention and ruin. Holmes sighs. I've always believed the universe is governed by logic, he says. But nights like these remind me that chance has a sense of humor. Weeks later, the papers still print occasional references to the engineer's affair. They call it a marvel of modern crime, the sort of headline designed to sell breakfast editions. The facts, of course, are mostly wrong. They always are. But a small note on page 7 catches your eye. Unidentified woman seen aiding fire victims near Reading, believed to have perished in the blaze. Holmes reads it over your shoulder, expression unreadable. No, he murmurs. Not perished. She's cleverer than that. Some ghosts prefer to stay unseen. You glance at him. Do you ever tire of them, Holmes? The lies, the cruelty, the endless pattern. He gives a small, enigmatic smile. On the contrary, my dear friend, The pattern is the only proof that chaos can be understood. Without it, we'd all be drifting. He leans back, closing his eyes. The firelight throws his profile into sharp relief. The high cheekbones, the faint lines of fatigue, the ghost of amusement tugging at his mouth. Outside, the rain begins again. Soft, persistent, cleansing. For a while, neither of you speaks. The world feels strangely still, as if pausing to exhale after another breath of darkness. And in that hush, as the fire dwindles and the first gray hints of dawn creep into the window pane, you understand that something that Holmes would never admit aloud. That beneath all his precision and detachment, he chases these cases not for fame or justice, but for the brief, fierce spark of meaning they bring. That moment when chaos bows its head to reason. When the world, however briefly, makes sense. He opens his eyes and meets your gaze. You see it too, don't you? You nod. Sometimes, yes. Holmes smiles faintly. Then Watson, or rather you. Perhaps you understand me better than I thought. The violin hums again, a gentle, uncertain melody rising through the smoke. You sit back, letting the sound carry you towards sleep. And as it fades, you realize the truth that all of London seems built upon. That in every mystery, in every shadow, there's always a heartbeat, a human one, waiting to be found. It's Christmas in London, and for once, Baker Street looks almost cheerful. Snow drifts lazily past the window, settling on the sills and muffling the noise of the street below. Mrs. Hudson has hung a sprig of holly on the mantel, and somewhere down the block, a caroler sings off-key. Even Holmes, who normally treats holidays as mild inconveniences, seems half tamed by the season. He sits by the fire in his dressing gown, pipe unlit for once, reading a newspaper with mock disgust. "Look here, Watson," he says, though in this telling, it's you he's addressing. A goose, a hat, and a mystery. It's as if Fleet Street has resorted to writing my headlines for me. You glance at the article. Man attacked in Tottenham Court Road. Assailant flees, dropping Christmas goose and old hat. You raise an eyebrow. You mean to tell me you're interested in poultry now? Holmes grins faintly. My dear fellow, when one has eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how ridiculous, must be worth investigating, even if it honks. He tosses you the article. Goose, hat, and an unassuming man named Henry Baker. The bird was destined for his dinner, but he lost both it and his dignity during a scuffle with some ruffians. A kindly commissionaire brought the items to me, assuming I might trace the owner. Observe the simplicity. An object, a story, and a faint whiff of absurdity. Exactly the sort of puzzle to keep me from dying of boredom before Christmas supper. On the table before you lies the evidence. A battered felt hat, and beside it, a plump goose, neatly trussed, but long since gone cold. Holmes turns the hat over in his hands, like an archaeologist examining a relic. Very ordinary, you say? Precisely, he replies, which is why it tells us everything. He begins his analysis aloud, pacing between deductions like stepping stones. Size, large. Therefore, our Mr. Baker is of generous build. The hat is several years old, but expensive when new, showing he has known better times. The brim is cracked from being carried rather than worn. Vanity, perhaps, or embarrassment. The dust here, reddish, from gas jets rather than candles, meaning he lives in the newer parts of town. The inner band bears the scent of hair cream, lime-based, popular among intellectual clerks. Finally, note the loop of taffeta string at the back. It once held a card from a hatter named Peterson, now missing. A man who loses labels loses self-assurance. In short, our Henry Baker is a fallen gentleman, still clinging to refinement. You can't help but chuckle. From a hat? From a mind, Holmes corrects. The hat merely recorded its owner's confessions in felt. As for the goose, he takes up a small magnifying glass, examining its breast. Plump, well-fed, London bred. No mud on the feet, no grain residue, city stock, likely purchased from a club. And now, he slices it open with clinical precision. We ask it to reveal its final secret. From within, something clinks softly. You lean closer, expecting a pellet or wishbone. Instead, Holmes lifts out a small object wrapped in congealed fat. A blue gem, glittering even in the dim firelight. You both freeze. The blue carbuncle? Holmes whispers. Stolen from the Countess of Morcar only a week ago. £1,000 reward for its return. He laughs softly, eyes bright. Watson, I believe we've just solved a crime while preparing dinner. The hours that follow are pure Holmesian chaos. Footsteps, maps, interviews, and a goose chase that feels literal and metaphorical in equal measure. You follow him through Covent Garden markets, through flurries of feathers and squawking crates, until at last you find the trail leading to the Alpha Inn, where a nervous landlord confirms that the goose was part of a batch purchased for the Goose Club, a humble Christmas raffle among working men. Holmes takes down the winner's name, Henry Baker. That evening, just as snow begins to fall again, a knock comes at the door. A portly man with thinning hair and nervous eyes stands there, hatless. You advertised, sir? He says, about a lost goose and hat. Holmes greets him with courteous warmth, handing back the hat. Indeed, Mr. Baker. May I ask how the goose came into your possession? Baker explains the raffle, the attack, the panic. He seems genuinely bewildered by the fuss. When Holmes offers him a replacement goose, one procured earlier from the same inn, the man's face brightens. You're most kind, sir. I never thought to trouble you further. Merry Christmas. The door closes behind him. Holmes turns to you. Not our thief, then. Too guileless. But he leads us one link closer. The bird came from Breckenridge, the Covent Garden dealer. And Breckenridge never forgets a face. The market is chaos when you arrive. Men shouting, horses steaming, the smell of hay and smoke mingling in the winter air. Breckenridge stands behind his stall, a mountain of temper and red scarf. Ah, Mr. Holmes again, he bellows. And what scandal do you bring me this time? Another hat with a history? Holmes grins. Only a simple question. Who supplied you the geese for the Alpha Club? Breckenridge snorts. Ask the man who brought them. One James Ryder, hotel attendant. Came begging this morning. Wanted to know if any had been returned. Said he'd lost track of a bird. I told him to go hang for a fool. Holmes's eyes narrow. Indeed. Then I believe our game has come to roost. You find James Ryder trembling in his lodgings, pale as the snow outside. He collapses almost the instant Holmes names him, babbling the whole confession in gasping bursts. He'd stolen the blue carbuncle from the Countess's jewel case at the hotel, aided by a maid. But when panic set in, he'd hidden it inside a goose meant for his sister's Christmas feast. Confusion followed. The wrong bird was sold, and the priceless gem passed through half of London's ovens before finding its way to Holmes's carving knife. By the end, Ryder is sobbing, hands clutching Holmes's sleeve. For pity's sake, Mr. Holmes, don't turn me in. It's Christmas. I swear I'll reform. Holmes studies him for a long, quiet moment. The fire pops softly in the grate. Watson, he says finally, what shall we do with this pitiful creature? You hesitate. The law is clear. Yes, Holmes says, but so is mercy. He turns back to Ryder. Go. Leave England. Start anew. But remember, you nearly destroyed yourself for a trinket no larger than your fingernail. Ryder flees into the night, sobs echoing down the stairs. You stare at Holmes, stunned. You're letting him go? Holmes lights his pipe, face unreadable. It is the season of forgiveness. Besides, there's little satisfaction in punishing a man already terrified by his own conscience. He leans back, smoke curling upward like thought itself. Crime, Watson, is a human frailty. Understanding it is my business. Condemning it, God's. Later that evening, the two of you sit before the fire. Outside, the bells of St. Paul's carry across the snowbound city. The flat glows warm, shadows of the holly dancing across the wallpaper. You sip brandy in silence, the world softened by the hour. Holmes stares into the flames, his features half lit, half lost in reflection. "You know," he says quietly, "this little affair taught me more than any of our grander exploits. There's poetry in triviality. A hat, a goose, a jewel, and through them, the anatomy of greed, fear, and redemption. All London contained in a single Christmas dinner." You smile faintly. "You almost sound sentimental." "Almost," he admits. "But sentiment is a chemical I prefer to handle sparingly." The fire hisses softly. Outside, snow begins to fall again, thicker now, muffling the whole world in stillness. Holmes rises, fetches his violin, and plays something so soft and slow it could almost be mistaken for the sound of snow itself. The melody folds around you, warm and delicate, as if time itself were pausing to listen. And as you sit there, drowsy and content, you realize that for all his logic and cold precision, Sherlock Holmes is, in his own strange way, deeply human. Perhaps that's the real mystery, the one no casebook can solve. The fire burns low, the last note fades, and somewhere in the quiet heart of London, a church bell marks midnight, echoing over rooftops dusted in white, where sinners and saints alike are dreaming of peace. For tonight, even Holmes allows himself to believe in it. The fog rolls in again, thick as wool, erasing the city's edges until London feels more like a fever dream than a place. Somewhere beyond Baker Street, bells toll faintly through the mist. It's one of those nights when time itself seems to drift, when gas lamps burn halos into the air and the Thames groans like an old, restless giant. Holmes stands at the window, arms folded, watching the blur of passing carriages. He hasn't spoken in hours. The embers in the hearth have sunk to a low, patient glow. You've long since given up trying to read the newspaper and simply sit, listening to the rhythmic tick-tick of the mantel clock. Then comes the sound you've learned to recognize. The faint, deliberate step of Mrs. Hudson in the hallway, followed by her careful knock. "There's a lady to see you, Mr. Holmes," she says softly, and she seems frightened. Holmes doesn't turn from the window. "Show her in." The door opens, and a young woman enters. A governess, by her modest blue dress and the way her hands twist her gloves like a rosary. Her eyes are wide, haunted. She hesitates before speaking, as though afraid her very words might summon some unseen danger. "Mr. Holmes," she begins, voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Violet Hunter. I've come to ask your advice about a position I've been offered. The pay is unusually high, and the conditions are unusually strange." Holmes finishes for her, turning at last. "Excellent. Do go on." She tells her story carefully, every word trembling under its own weight. "I'm a governess by trade," she says. "Recently, I received an offer from a Mr. Jeffro Rucastle of the Copper Beeches, near Winchester. He wishes me to tutor his 6-year-old son. The salary is generous, £100 a year, but the requirements are peculiar." Holmes gestures for her to sit. "Peculiar in what way?" "For one," Violet says, "he insists that I cut my hair short. Then, that I wear a particular electric blue dress each evening at dinner. And sometimes he asks that I sit by the window in that dress, with my back turned to the room, and remain perfectly still until he tells me otherwise." The silence that follows feels heavy. Even you feel a chill crawl down your spine. Holmes steeples his fingers. Most intriguing. Did he offer any explanation? None, sir. He merely said his wife is delicate and that these requests please her. The money is tempting, but I cannot shake the feeling that I'm being used for some deception. Holmes nods slowly. Your instincts do you credit, Miss Hunter. Accept the position. But send word to me the moment anything seems amiss. I shall come myself to the Copper Beeches. She hesitates. You think I'm in danger? Holmes smiles faintly. I think you are in a story, Miss Hunter. And those rarely end quietly. 2 weeks later, her telegram arrives. Please come at once. Something wrong. VH. By the time you and Holmes reach Winchester, the winter sun is sinking, staining the fields in rust and violet. The Copper Beeches appears ahead, a tall red brick house half smothered by ivy. Its windows narrow, like eyes that never blink. Violet meets you at the gate, her hair cropped short as she described. He insisted upon it, she explains quickly. And every evening, I'm made to wear that dress and sit by the window. But I've realized, Mr. Holmes, there's another building opposite the house, an empty cottage, and I think someone is watching from it. Holmes's gaze sharpens. Excellent observation. Tonight we shall discover who. Dinner is a tense affair. Mr. Rucastle, a large, florid man with false cheer, laughs too loudly and never meets your eyes. His wife sits silent beside him, pale and trembling, her gaze flicking between her husband and Violet as though trapped in invisible chains. After the meal, Violet performs her evening ritual, sitting by the parlor window in the blue dress, as Rucastle orders the shutters open to the night. The firelight frames her silhouette like a portrait. Holmes and you retreat quietly to the garden. From the hedge, you can see the dark outline of the cottage opposite. Holmes raises his lantern briefly, just enough to catch movement. A face, pale and fleeting, flashes behind the glass. There, he whispers. Our watcher. And not a stranger's eyes, I think. Later that night, when the house has fallen silent, Holmes and you slip back through the garden. The lock of the cellar yields easily to his tools. Inside, the air smells of dust and old wood. A narrow stair leads upward to a door bolted from the outside. Holmes motions for silence. He unfastens the bolt. The door swings open, revealing a small room lit only by moonlight filtering through the bars of a window. On the bed lies a young woman, frail, disheveled, her hair cropped like violets. She startles awake, eyes wide with terror. My name is Holmes, he says gently. We're here to help you. She stares, trembling. Please, don't let him find me. Holmes turns to you. Watson, no, you. Release her quickly. We've seen enough. Just then, a heavy tread sounds on the stairs. Rucastle's voice roars below. Who's there? Holmes snatches the lantern, whispers, "Stay close," and steps forward into the shadows. Rucastle bursts into the room, gun in hand. But he's too late. The lantern flare blinds him. Holmes's cane knocks the weapon aside. The man lunges, and from the darkness behind him comes a sudden, guttural snarl. The household mastiff, kept starved and half mad, has broken loose. It leaps, and for one terrible second you think it will tear Holmes apart. But Holmes sidesteps. The beast collides with its master instead. When it's over, Rucastle lies unconscious, his leg torn. Holmes binds the wound quickly. He'll live, he says, though perhaps he'll find confinement as educational as his daughter did. By morning, the truth comes clear. The young woman is Alice Rucastle, the daughter from her husband's first marriage. She'd fallen in love with a sailor, but her father, greedy for her inheritance, locked her away, pretending she was ill. When Alice's lover returned to claim her, Rucastle used Violet as a decoy, hoping the man would believe she was Alice and abandon the chase. He played puppeteer with human beings, Holmes says bitterly, watching the sunlight creep over the ruined garden. Such men treat their families as exhibits in a cabinet, arranged for pride, not affection. Violet looks at him with gratitude and something like awe. "You've saved my life, Mr. Holmes." He shakes his head. "No, Miss Hunter. You saved your own by listening to the voice that most people ignore, the one that whispers when something isn't right." The train ride back to London is quiet. Holmes sits by the window, the fog curling past his reflection. A curious case, he muses. No murder, no theft, merely captivity and deception. And yet, it feels darker than either. The mind's cruelty to its own blood. You nod, staring out at the gray countryside. You think he'll recover? Physically, yes. Spiritually, I doubt he was ever whole. He glances at you then, with that faint, unreadable smile. It is odd, Watson. How often wickedness hides behind domestic walls. We expect danger in the alleyway, not the nursery. Back at Baker Street, the day fades into gentle routine. Holmes plays a melancholy tune on the violin while you, or rather, you as the listener, sip tea, letting the fire's warmth erase the memory of that cold house. Outside, the city resumes its endless rhythm. London doesn't remember its villains for long. It swallows them whole and moves on. Holmes pauses mid-phrase and looks up. "Do you know, Watson, I sometimes wonder if my work truly changes anything. The world keeps producing new deceivers as quickly as I expose the old." You smile. Perhaps the act of seeing clearly is itself the victory. He considers that, eyes softening. Perhaps. Vision against fog. That's all it ever is. He sets the violin aside. The silence between you stretches, warm and companionable. And as the fire hums low, and snow begins again to gather on the ledge, you realize how rare such peace is in this strange life you've chosen. The quiet after the chaos, the calm between the cases. But you also know it won't last, because somewhere, in another corner of London, another desperate knock is already being rehearsed against another door. And when it comes, Sherlock Holmes will rise again from his chair, smiling that small, dangerous smile that means the night will not end in sleep. The following morning, you wake to the steady rhythm of hoofbeats echoing along Baker Street and the smell of rain-soaked wool. The city is slick with a fine drizzle, and the light has that pale, silvery quality that belongs only to English mornings. Mrs. Hudson brings in breakfast, tea steaming, toast crisp. But Holmes is already halfway out the door, coat collar up, eyes alight. "Come along," he says. "There's been a telegram from the inspector. Silver Blaze is missing." You blink, still half asleep. "Silver Blaze? The racehorse?" "The very one," he replies, already on the stairs. "The favorite for the Wessex Cup. Gone from the stables at King's Pyland. The trainer found dead. Scotland Yard is, of course, galloping in circles. We must take a steadier gait. You have long since stopped questioning the speed at which Sherlock Holmes moves through life. One moment you're buttering toast, the next you're in a railway carriage hurtling through fog-drenched fields. The train whistles, scattering crows from bare hedgerows as you read the telegram again. "Horse missing, trainer killed, suspect rival stable, please advise." Holmes folds the message neatly. Murder and sport, my dear friend. The Englishman's twin passions. By the time you reach Dartmoor, the drizzle has thickened into mist. The moor spreads out vast and silent, dotted with gorse and gray stone, the air heavy with peat and rain. The King's Pyland stables stand like dark shapes against the horizon, a single lantern burning beside the stable door. Colonel Ross, owner of the missing champion, greets you with a mix of pride and panic. Holmes, you must find him. My horse, my Silver Blaze. The race is in 3 days, and half of England has money on it. Holmes removes his gloves slowly, his eyes scanning the ground. And the trainer, John Straker? Dead, Ross says grimly. Found on the moor, head bashed in, a small knife in his hand. His mare returned without him. Holmes crouches immediately, examining the prints in the damp soil. Multiple sets of hoof marks, yet none made by Silver Blaze himself. He murmurs. And these? See how the impressions overlap. The killer stood here, the body fell there. Curious symmetry. He rises, brushing his knees. Tell me, Colonel, was the stable door locked? From the inside, Ross says. Ah, then we shall start by asking the only witness who cannot lie. He moves toward the stables, placing a hand against the flank of a nervous mare. The horses stamp and snort, their eyes wide. Holmes watches them for a long moment, then smiles faintly. Excellent. The dog did not bark in the night. Ross frowns. What of it? Everything, Holmes says, for it means the intruder was someone the dog knew. That evening, the two of you walk out onto the moor. The wind carries the scent of heather and wet grass. Far off, the tor rises like a black tooth against the sky. Holmes moves with his usual effortless grace, lantern held low, every step a question answered. See here, he says, kneeling beside a patch of flattened ferns. Candle wax, white, tallow-based, used in stables, and nearby, a splinter of steel. The small knife Straker carried was no weapon of defense. It was a surgical blade used for trimming a horse's tendon. He stands, his coat whipping in the wind. A man kills himself by accident while attempting surgery he should never have tried. How ironic, don't you think? You stare at him. You mean Straker wounded himself? Precisely, Holmes says. A plot to maim the champion horse before the race, ensuring a fortune for those betting against it. Straker planned to cut the tendon ever so slightly. A lame horse by morning, no suspicion by evening. But Silver Blaze kicked free, striking him down. Justice by hoof. You feel a shiver crawl down your spine as the wind moans through the heather. Then where is the horse now? Holmes smiles. Safe but unrecognizable. At dawn, Holmes inspects the neighboring stable at Mapleton, owned by Silas Brown, a rival trainer with a face like old leather and a temper to match. You accuse me of theft, sir? Brown snarls. I accuse you of grooming genius. Holmes replies calmly, brushing a hand through a chestnut horse's mane. The color is quite even, save for this faint white streak hidden under dye. Curious. A horse with a blaze on its brow, perhaps? Brown pales. You can't prove... Holmes steps closer. I have no need. When Silver Blaze gallops at the Wessex Cup, his speed will prove it for me. 2 days later, the stands at the racecourse roar with excitement. The fog has lifted, leaving a pale sun glinting off silver flasks and monocles. You stand beside Holmes as the horses line up, their breath steaming in the cold. Colonel Ross leans forward anxiously. Silver Blaze is still missing. My stable hand swears the favorite has vanished. Holmes smiles. Look again at the field, Colonel. Your horse is there, only dyed chestnut and entered under a false name. When he wins, the truth will out. And indeed, when the flag drops, one horse surges ahead, a blur of power and grace. The crowd roars. Holmes watches without expression, but you can see the faintest glint of satisfaction in his eyes. When the race ends, Silver Blaze is triumphant, the disguise washed away by sweat and wind. The colonel turns, speechless, as Holmes hands him a folded note. From Straker's accounts, Holmes explains. The proof of his betrayal. He sought fortune in secret bets, Instead, he found justice in a single kick. That evening, back at Baker Street, the fog presses once more against the window panes. Holmes stands by the fire, polishing his magnifying glass with a scrap of linen. "You see, my dear friend," he says, "truth often hides in silence." Everyone looked for the barking dog, the broken lock, the missing man. Yet it was the absence of a sound, the dog's quiet, that spoke loudest. You smile. You make it sound almost poetic. "It is," he says softly. "Science and poetry are closer cousins than the world admits. Both seek pattern amid chaos." He sets the glass down, gaze distant. "I sometimes wonder, Watson." He pauses, and though he never finishes the thought, you can guess it. Whether the patterns he finds in the world truly bring order, or only reveal deeper layers of disorder beneath. Outside, rain begins again, tapping softly against the glass. The city exhales, endless and gray. Holmes reaches for his violin. As the bow draws across the strings, a melancholy tune fills the room. Slow, hypnotic, echoing the rhythm of hoofbeats fading into distance. You close your eyes, hearing not just music, but the hum of the whole case distilled into sound. The silence of the dog, the thunder of the chase, the sigh of truth uncovered. Holmes plays until the fire dwindles and the last note fades into the London night. And as you drift toward sleep, one thought lingers. In a world full of noise, Sherlock Holmes listens most intently to what isn't there. You wake before dawn to the smell of salt in the air, the faint whistle of a train, and Holmes's silhouette framed against the pale window. He's dressed already. Dark coat, traveling hat. Eyes sharp with that particular gleam that means sleep has been replaced by deduction. "We're heading west," he says without turning. "Cornwall. Something unsettling has found its way there. A matter of science, perhaps, though the locals call it witchcraft." You groan softly. "Can't Scotland Yard handle witchcraft?" Holmes's lips twitch. "They'd likely arrest the moon for loitering. No, this one's mine." Within the hour, you're on a train rushing toward the sea. The car smells of coal and wet wool. Holmes says little. Instead, he stares out the window, fingers drumming on his knee, mind already 3 steps ahead of reality. The telegram from the local vicar still lies unfolded on the seat beside him. 3 deaths in one night. Faces contorted in terror. Powder found near hearth. Please come at once. Devil's Foot suspected. You'd heard of the Devil's Foot before. An old Cornish legend. A powder said to drive men mad with fear, to make them see horrors beyond reason. You'd never believed it. But then, you've learned that disbelief and knowledge are often uneasy companions when traveling with Sherlock Holmes. The journey ends in a small, coastal village, clinging to the cliffs like a secret. The sea stretches beyond, gray, restless, ancient. The wind tastes of salt and moss. A carriage takes you along a narrow lane lined with blackthorn, until you reach a cottage surrounded by police tape and superstition. The vicar meets you at the door, hat in hand. "Terrible business, Mr. Holmes. The Tregennis family. Found them at breakfast. 2 dead, 1 raving mad. Doctor said it looked as if they died of fright." Holmes kneels immediately beside the hearth. The air smells faintly metallic. On the table, untouched tea, cold bread, a candle burned to its base. He takes a pinch of gray dust from the grate and lifts it toward the light. "This," he murmurs, "is no ordinary ash." Outside, gulls cry over the cliffs, their voices echoing like ghosts. Holmes wraps the powder carefully, labels it in his neat handwriting, and turns to the vicar. "You said there was a survivor?" "Yes, Mr. Mortimer Tregennis. But his mind's gone. He keeps whispering that he saw the devil's face." You find the man later in a small room at the inn, eyes staring through the wall, hands twitching like trapped birds. Holmes sits beside him, speaking in a low, steady tone. "Tell me what you saw, Mr. Tregennis." The man shudders. "We were laughing, playing cards. Then the fire flared bright, red as blood. There was a smell, like burning earth. My sister screamed, and then shadows, faces in the smoke. I ran." Holmes watches him for a long, silent moment. "You ran," he repeats softly. "And left them behind?" The man's head jerks up. "I didn't mean..." But Holmes is already on his feet. "We shall speak again." Outside, you catch his expression. Grim, almost pitying. "Guilt," he murmurs. "A man haunted not by devils, but by conscience. Yet there's science here too. A chemical that mimics terror itself. Imagine fear distilled into dust. That night, you stay in a cottage overlooking the sea. The wind howls through the chimney, and the waves below beat against the cliffs like a giant's heart. Holmes sits by the fire, grinding the mysterious powder in a small glass vial. Volatile, he mutters. Alkaloid-based, perhaps. The faint scent of burnt roots. I suspect its origins lie in some African or Eastern poison, smuggled by traders who never knew its true power. You watch nervously as he sprinkles a trace on the coals. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the smoke changes color, pale, shifting, alive. Holmes stiffens, eyes wide, breath quickening. Good God. You rush forward, pulling him back as he stumbles. The fire flickers wildly, casting grotesque shapes on the walls. Holmes grips your arm, trembling. I saw... No, never mind. We have our answer. He collapses into a chair, face pale as ash. For the first time, you see something like fear in him. The next morning, word arrives that Mortimer Tregennis is dead. Found in his locked room, eyes bulging, mouth twisted in horror. Holmes stares at the telegram for a long while before speaking. He killed his family, he says quietly. And the man who gave him the poison has now returned to kill him in turn. Retribution, not the devil. He folds the paper, tucks it into his pocket. But I must confirm it. You accompany him to the great house on the hill, where Dr. Sterndale, a colonial explorer, resides among relics of his travels. Masks, skulls, maps. The man himself is tall, gaunt, eyes burning with strange conviction. You know why I'm here, Holmes says without preamble. Sterndale nods. Yes, I killed him. He gestures toward a small chest on the table. Inside lies a vial identical to Holmes's sample. The devil's foot root, he explains. A plant from West Africa. When burned, it releases a vapor that drives men mad with visions. I brought it back for study. I never meant... His voice cracks. Tregennis used it on his own kin. For money. When I returned and learned the truth, I gave him the same death he gave them. Holmes listens in silence. Then, after a long pause, he says softly, You have acted as judge and executioner. Sterndale meets his gaze. And will you turn me in? The wind moans through the broken window. Holmes exhales slowly. No. The law deals poorly with devils of the mind. Leave England. Take your sins with you. Sterndale bows his head. You are merciful. Holmes shakes his head. I am tired. That night, as you prepare to leave, the sun sinks blood red over the cliffs. The wind smells of seaweed and smoke. Holmes stands alone at the edge, the sea roaring beneath him. You saw something in that smoke, didn't you? You ask quietly. He doesn't answer for a while. Then, without turning, he says, A vision of myself, of what I might become, if ever I believed knowledge could replace compassion. You say nothing. Some truths are best left unexamined. The next morning, You board the train back to London. Holmes sits silent the whole way, hands clasped, eyes distant. When the city finally reappears through the window, the fog, the chimneys, the slow pulse of civilization, he seems to breathe again. "Ah," he murmurs, sanity restored. He glances at you, managing a faint smile. "I think I'll take up beekeeping one day. Far safer company than mankind." You laugh softly. "You? Beekeeping? Why not? Bees are logical. Their crimes are predictable, and they never write anonymous letters." The train rattles on through the gray morning, carrying you both back toward Baker Street, toward the endless hum of London, where another telegram, no doubt, already waits. You watch Holmes watching the city, the flicker of light in his eyes, the faint curl of amusement at his lips. And you understand that this man will never truly rest, because every time he looks upon the fog, he sees not mystery, but invitation. And every time he breathes the city's air, it seems to whisper back to him, "There's work to be done." The year turns, as it always does, with fog in the streets and coal smoke drifting low over the Thames. Life in London resumes its dull rhythm. Omnibus wheels grinding, merchants shouting, the steady heartbeat of a city too vast to notice the tragedies it carries. You've begun to think that perhaps the world has granted Holmes a few quiet months. He rises late, plays his violin, and even, on rare days, indulges in aimless conversation. Then one morning, a letter arrives. You notice it before he does. A single envelope on the breakfast tray, the handwriting small, neat and cold. The seal bears a curious symbol, a web of lines radiating from a single point. Holmes's spoon stops midway to his mouth. His eyes sharpen. "So," he murmurs, "the spider stirs." You frown. "Who?" He doesn't answer. He opens the envelope with surgical care, reads the brief message, and folds it again. When he finally looks up, the playfulness has vanished from his face. "Pack light," he says. "We may not return soon. I believe the end has begun." The trail leads you out of London, across half of Europe, through the iron arteries of the continent. First to Brussels, where a banker vanishes with government bonds, then to Strasbourg, where a British agent is found poisoned beside a railway timetable. Everywhere you go, the pattern is the same. Criminal perfection, unseen orchestration. Holmes grows quieter with each stop, the tension coiling in him like wire. At last, in a candlelit inn on the Rhine, he sets down his teacup and says, almost gently, "Watson, if you ever doubted that a mind could rival my own, let this cure you." He takes a scrap of paper from his pocket, covered in names and red lines connecting them. At the center, Professor James Moriarty, the Napoleon of crime, Holmes says. He sits in his web while the rest dance. You could spend a lifetime tracing his threads and never touch the man himself. Until now. You study the chart. And you intend to face him? Holmes's smile is faint, brittle. When two such minds exist, they are destined to meet. It is simple physics. Opposite forces, drawn inevitably together. He closes the notebook, the candlelight flickering across his face. Tomorrow, we go to Switzerland. The professor and I have an appointment at Reichenbach Falls. The journey south feels less like travel and more like a slow descent. The air grows colder, purer. Mountains rise like frozen waves, snow glittering on their peaks. By the time you reach the village of Meiringen, spring has melted into something sharper, quieter. Holmes seems lighter than he has in months. He jokes with the innkeeper, comments on the view, even hums a few bars of Bach under his breath. Yet beneath it all, you sense the weight pressing behind his calm. That evening, as the sun sets over the valley, he stands by the window, watching mist curl between the peaks. "If anything should happen," he says quietly, "you'll find my notes in the left-hand drawer. Burn them unread." You shake your head. Holmes, this is madness. Let the police handle Moriarty. He smiles without humor. The police? My dear friend, they would drown in his mathematics before breakfast. No, this must be finished privately. He turns, places a hand on your shoulder. You've been my companion in every storm, Watson. But this one, you must not follow me into. The way he says it, soft, final, strikes you harder than any blow. The next morning, you set out together toward the falls. The path winds through pine and stone, the air sharp with glacier chill. You can hear the roar long before you see it, the endless thunder of water plunging into the gorge below. At the overlook, mist fills the air like breath. Holmes stops, gazing down at the torrent. Beautiful, isn't it? Nature's own orchestra, a fitting stage. Before you can reply, a messenger appears from the inn, a note in hand, addressed to you. Urgent. Mrs. Watson gravely ill. Return to Meiringen at once. You feel the blood drain from your face. Holmes reads your expression and nods slowly. Go, he says. You must. I'll join you in an hour. You hesitate. Something in his voice feels too calm, too practiced. Holmes, he smiles, that familiar crooked smile. Trust me, old friend. Reluctantly, you turn back down the path. It takes less than an hour to realize the message was false. When you return, panting and furious, the ledge is empty. Only Holmes's footprints remain, leading to the very edge of the rock. And there, two sets of prints. One smaller, the other long, deliberate. Then the scuffle marks, the churned mud. And finally, nothing. The spray rises from the gorge like smoke. You shout his name, but the roar swallows it. The mist stings your eyes, your throat, your very lungs. And through it, you glimpse something caught on a branch below. A scrap of paper, pinned by a rock. You crawl forward, heart pounding. It's his handwriting. My dear Watson, it reads, I write these few lines through the courtesy of Professor Moriarty, who awaits me below. My career has reached its end. The rest is silence, and perhaps clarity. Know that I died as I lived, in pursuit of the final truth. Forgive me the trickery that brought you away. It was necessary. Do not grieve for me long. The world will always need mystery, and where there is mystery, there is life. S.O. You fold the letter with shaking hands. For a long time, you sit there, listening to the thunder of the falls, the endless pulse of water on stone. It feels like a requiem. When at last you rise, the world feels quieter, smaller. The air carries no trace of him, only the faint scent of tobacco on your sleeve and the echo of his voice in your mind. The game is afoot. Weeks pass. London moves on. The newspapers call it tragedy, heroism, rumor. Some claim both men fell. Others whisper that one survived. You read them all and burn each in turn. The flat at Baker Street stands half empty now. Dust gathers on the violin. The chair by the fire remains untouched. Mrs. Hudson still sets out 2 cups by habit, though she says nothing. Sometimes, on cold nights, you imagine you hear him. His voice behind you, his step on the stair, the rustle of his papers. But when you turn, it's only the wind in the chimney. The world feels duller without him. And yet, somewhere in the fog outside, you sense that London still moves to the rhythm he taught it. Pattern, reason, observation. You find yourself noticing things, mud on a cab wheel, cigar ash on a glove, and smiling through the ache. One evening, you walk to the river. The water glimmers under gaslight, carrying the city's secrets out to sea. You take the letter from your pocket, unfold it one last time, and whisper, "Farewell, Holmes. Then you let it fall. The paper catches the current, spins once, and vanishes. The sound of the water echoes faintly, like applause at the end of a play. And you know, wherever he went, whatever lies beyond the mist and the fall, Sherlock Holmes would approve of the ending. Because to him, even death was only another puzzle to be solved. For months, London moves without rhythm. The world seems strangely out of tune, as if some essential note in its great humming chord has gone missing. You keep the Baker Street rooms out of loyalty, though Mrs. Hudson dusts more than she cleans now, and the old violin sits silent in its corner, a ghost of melody trapped in wood. At first, you think the city itself will forget him. But Sherlock Holmes was never a man one could quite erase. You see him everywhere, in the flash of a carriage mirror, in a sudden waft of Turkish tobacco from a passerby, in the echo of a bar of violin music drifting from a neighboring window. The newspapers, too, can't leave him alone. They publish sentimental obituaries and melodramatic sketches of his final struggle with Professor Moriarty. The public reads, sighs, and moves on. But you, the man who walked beside him through fog and fire, find the silence unbearable. So you write. You fill notebooks with your recollections, his methods, his eccentricities, his quiet acts of kindness that few ever saw. It's a way to preserve him, you tell yourself. But really, it's the only way to keep from believing he's truly gone. 3 years pass. Then, one bleak April evening, as rain scratches at the window, the bell rings. You hardly notice it at first. London bells never stop. But this one persists. Sharp, deliberate, almost familiar. You set down your pen and open the door. Standing there is a man in a threadbare coat, face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. His beard is long, gray with dust, his hands rough. A stranger, yet not. You stare at him, heart tightening. The man smiles faintly. You look as though you've seen a ghost, my dear Watson, and in an instant, the years collapse. A Holmes, you breathe. He steps inside, shutting the door against the rain. I trust you'll forgive the theatrics. Resurrection requires discretion. You stand there speechless, watching him remove the disguise piece by piece. Beard, wig, false nose. Beneath them, the face you thought lost to the Reichenbach Falls. Older, perhaps, but unmistakably alive. You how? You manage at last. He pours himself a glass of brandy as though he's merely returned from an errand. Moriarty fell? He says simply. I did not. His grip loosened first. Gravity chose sides. You stare. And you let the world think you were dead? For necessity, he replies. Moriarty's network did not die with him. To dismantle it, I needed invisibility. For 3 years, I followed the last of his lieutenants, Sebastian Moran, among others, across Europe, through Tibet, Persia, and the Sudan. Exhausting work, though occasionally scenic. He takes a sip, grimaces at the taste. English brandy hasn't improved. You find yourself laughing, half in relief, half in disbelief. You might have sent word. Holmes glances up, eyes softening. I considered it. But sentiment, my dear friend, is a dangerous indulgence for the living, and a ruinous one for the dead. By dawn, the fire has burned low, the room filled with smoke and stories. Holmes sits across from you, the shadows under his eyes deeper than you remember. So, you say quietly, what brings you back now? He smiles. The game, of course. It has resumed. And just like that, you're both swept back into motion. A week later, London wakes to news of the murder of the Honorable Ronald Adair. Shot in his locked study, no weapon found, no sign of forced entry. The papers call it a gentleman's enigma. You call it fate's invitation. Holmes takes you to the scene. Park Lane, a room smelling faintly of gunpowder and cigar smoke. The windows are open to the evening chill, the desk scattered with playing cards. Bridge, Holmes notes. Adair was an honest player, by reputation. Yet, he'd recently won a considerable sum. Someone feared exposure. He moves to the window, measuring angles with a glance. The shot came from outside. A marksman, rare precision. Only one man in London possesses it. Moran, you whisper. Holmes's smile is thin. Exactly. That night, the two of you sit hidden in the upper room of an empty house opposite the crime scene. The fog is thick. The streets silent save for the clop of the occasional horse. Holmes crouches near the window, assembling what looks like an odd mechanical lamp. An imitation of myself, he explains, adjusting the figure's silhouette. Wax head, weighted shoulders. From a distance, it should suffice. You frown. To draw fire? He nods, naturally. He places the figure in the window, its shape framed by lamplight, unmistakably human. Then he extinguishes every other light in the room. The two of you wait in silence. Minutes stretch. The air grows taut. Then, crack, glass shatters. The wax head explodes. Holmes moves faster than thought, darting to the window with revolver raised. Across the street, a shadow flinches. A tall man in a dark coat ducks behind a chimney. Now, Watson, you rush down the stairs, your heart pounding. Outside, constables appear from the fog. Holmes is doing, of course, arranged long before. The figure on the roof fires once more before being tackled. Moments later, the man lies in cuffs, snarling like a cornered wolf. Colonel Sebastian Moran. Holmes steps forward, calm as ever. You should have left me to my grave, Moran. Moran spits. You should have stayed there. Holmes gestures toward the shattered wax head. Your shot, I must admit, was impeccable. Though perhaps next time, choose a target that bleeds. The papers hail Holmes's return as a miracle. The great detective lives, they proclaim. Crowds gather outside Baker Street. Letters flood in. Mrs. Hudson nearly faints when she sees him in the doorway again. And you feel for the first time in years that the world has righted itself. The chair by the fire is occupied once more. The violin sings again. The air smells of tobacco and logic. But Holmes seems changed in ways he won't admit. He sleeps less, eats little, and spends hours staring into the fire as if calculating the world's remaining puzzles. One evening, you ask, "Do you ever think of Reichenbach?" He doesn't look up. Every day, I see the water. I hear the fall. It reminds me that intellect without humility is a precipice. Moriarty and I merely reached its edge from opposite sides. You nod slowly, and yet you returned. I had to, he says softly, because someone must stand between the world and its madness. And because... He trails off, then adds almost shyly, because I missed the conversation. You laugh, the sound surprising you. I missed it too. That night, as you leave his rooms, the city feels brighter. The fog glows silver beneath the gaslight. Somewhere, a violin plays faintly, a tune both melancholy and triumphant. Holmes sits in the window, bow in hand, head tilted toward the music only he can hear. You know he'll never truly rest. There will always be another case, another pattern, another mystery that keeps his mind from drowning in its own brilliance. But for now, at least, he's home. And so are you. Historians still argue over whether Conan Doyle resurrected Holmes because of public demand or private regret. Some say he planned it all along, others that he couldn't bear to leave the detective among the dead. But perhaps the truth is simpler. Some figures belong to the imagination the way stars belong to the night. Remove them, and the world feels dimmer. Holmes once said that life is infinitely stranger than anything the mind can invent. Watching him now, alive, reborn, quietly humming as London dreams outside, you believe it. The fire crackles. The fog presses gently at the glass, and the great detective, returned from the dead, smiles faintly, as though hearing the universe whisper its secrets once more. By the following winter, the city has already adjusted to Holmes's resurrection as if death itself had been just another temporary disguise. The gossip pages no longer print sketches of his narrow face, and Scotland Yard, never fond of humiliation, pretends it never mourned him at all. But to you, Baker Street feels different. There's a calm there now, the stillness that follows a storm. And yet underneath it hums the faint electric tension that means another case is waiting to be born. It begins, as so many of them do, with a letter. A plain envelope slid under the door, no seal, no signature, just a series of childish stick figures drawn across the paper. Little men, arms and legs akimbo, dancing in rows. The sight of them makes you laugh. But Holmes, bending close, does not. Ah, he murmurs, tracing the shapes with one long finger. An alphabet of mischief. A cipher, if I'm not mistaken. He turns the paper toward the light. The line thickness, the repetition. Someone is trying to speak without words. Watson, listen carefully. Somewhere out there is a woman who believes her life depends on these little dancers. 2 days later, your prediction proves true. A cab rattles up to Baker Street, and a pale, trembling woman steps out. Her name, she says, is Mrs. Hilton Cubitt of Ridlingthorpe Manor, Norfolk. She carries the letter you've already seen, and a new one besides, covered with more of the strange dancing figures. Holmes reads each silently, lips moving in calculation. Your husband, I presume, knows nothing of these? She hesitates. He knows, but he trusts me. He says the figures are nonsense. They come every few days, left on the sundial, slipped beneath the door. We are happy, Mr. Holmes. Or we were. Holmes looks up sharply. And before your marriage? Anything from your past that might explain them? Her eyes drop. I was born in America. There was someone once. I thought it long forgotten. Nothing, Holmes says gently, is ever forgotten by those with a reason to remember. You travel that night to Norfolk, the train slicing through sleet and black fields. The manor stands isolated amid bare trees, its chimneys smoking like old sentinels. Mr. Cubitt greets you, a solid man, cheerful despite the worry etched around his eyes. My wife frets over these scribbles, he says. I'd sooner think them the work of children. Holmes kneels before the latest note pinned to the garden gate. His magnifying glass flashes briefly in the lantern light. These are not children's hands, he murmurs. The strokes are deliberate, the spacing mathematical. And notice the sequence. 5 dancers repeated, then 3, then a new form with a raised arm. An evolution. He straightens. Mr. Cubitt, I advise you to remain inside tonight. Bolt every window. The man chuckles uneasily. Afraid of bogeymen, Mr. Holmes? Afraid of men, Holmes replies simply. Sometime past midnight, a gunshot shatters the silence. You're out of bed before your mind catches up, racing down the corridor. In the drawing room, lanterns flicker over a terrible tableau. Mr. Cubitt slumped across a chair, blood dark on his waistcoat. Mrs. Cubitt unconscious beside him, a revolver fallen from her hand. The window stands open to the storm. Holmes moves instantly, scanning the floor, the carpet, the sill. He crouches, fingers brushing something metallic, a spent cartridge, and beside it, a trail of muddy footprints leading out into the garden. Not suicide, he murmurs. 2 weapons, 2 sets of prints. You glance at him. Then she defended him, he says. Poor soul. Outside, wind drives the sleet sideways as you follow the tracks through the garden, across the lane, and into the meadow beyond. There, by the hedgerow, lies another body. Thin, ragged, face turned toward the sky. A revolver still clenched in his hand. Holmes kneels beside him, lantern casting gold across the man's features. An American, he says quietly. Judging by the clothing, a drifter, or perhaps an old suitor. He pulls from the man's pocket another note, this one bearing the same grotesque stickmen. Cipher complete, Holmes murmurs. The story written in drawings. Back inside, Mrs. Cubitt lies pale but breathing. When she wakes, Holmes explains the truth with a gentleness that surprises even you. The dancing men, he says, were messages from your past. A code once used by a gang in Chicago. This man, Abe Slaney, sought to blackmail you into returning. Your husband discovered the plot, confronted him. A struggle followed. He fired first. She, in terror, fired back. 2 bullets, 2 lives destroyed by one alphabet of folly. Mrs. Cubitt begins to sob quietly. Holmes steps away, leaving you to comfort her. When you find him later, he's outside beneath the gray dawn, staring toward the horizon. Why did you speak so softly? You ask. You could have condemned her. He shrugs. Condemnation is redundant where guilt has already done the work. Besides, he adds, she loved him. That makes her punishment eternal. Back on the train to London, the fields blur past in a wash of frost and pale sun. Holmes leans back, eyes half closed. The human heart, Watson, he says, or to you as listener, remains the one cipher that resists solution. We can decode ink and numbers, but not affection. He opens his eyes then, the old steel glinting behind them. Yet, I suppose that's why the world still turns. You watch him for a long time, the rhythmic click of the rails echoing like a heartbeat. For once, even Holmes seems content to let silence finish the conversation. Historians like to label the adventure of the dancing men as proof of Holmes's logical brilliance, his mastery of language and pattern. But if you were there, you'd know it wasn't the code that haunted him. It was the look on Mrs. Cubitt's face when she realized knowledge could come too late. Sometimes, in later years, you'd catch Holmes staring at the chalkboard he used for deciphering, the erased outlines of stickmen faintly visible beneath new equations. He'd call it coincidence. You'd call it memory. And through the fog outside, the city would go on dancing in its own invisible code. Each light in each window a signal, each life another symbol waiting to be read. Holmes would strike a match, relight his pipe, and murmur, almost to himself, "People think the mysteries end when the killer is caught. But they're wrong, Watson. The mysteries never end. They merely change their handwriting." You'd smile, half in sadness, half in awe, because deep down, you knew he was right. By late spring, the London fog gives way to a thin, almost golden sunlight that slips through the lace curtains of Baker Street. It paints the cluttered room in a warm haze, making even the endless piles of newspaper clippings and chemical bottles seem somehow domestic. Mrs. Hudson has taken to humming as she dusts, as though the mere fact of Sherlock Holmes being alive again restores the natural order of things. And yet, even in peace, Holmes cannot help but court the strange. It begins with a sound, a muffled crash from the street below, followed by the desperate shouts of a constable and the tinkle of broken glass. Holmes rises at once, crossing to the window in 3 long strides. He says, "Someone's shattered something precious." He's right, as always. A moment later, a red-faced man bursts through the door, hat askew, clutching a plaster bust of Napoleon. What remains of one, anyway? The poor statue's head is missing, the fragments scattered across the pavement outside. "Mr. Holmes," the man gasps. "You've got to help." He's at it again. The man introduces himself as Lestrade's informant. an art dealer who's been watching a bizarre wave of vandalism sweep through the city. 6 busts of Napoleon Bonaparte, all identical, all smashed by an unknown assailant. No theft, no other damage. Just the sound of plaster meeting cobblestone in the dead of night. Holmes listens, expression unreadable. 6 Napoleons, he murmurs. A curious form of protest. One almost admires the consistency. Lestrade arrives shortly after, exasperated and red-eared as ever. We've got the scoundrel this time, Mr. Holmes. Caught him near Chiswick, hammer in hand. Name's Beppo, a foreigner, of course. Holmes raises an eyebrow. And what motive have you assigned him? Revenge against French emperors? Lestrade snorts. Madness, most likely. Holmes smiles thinly. Madness is rarely so methodical. Let us pay Mr. Beppo a visit. The man they find in the cell is small, wiry, and oddly cheerful despite his arrest. His dark eyes glitter with something that isn't quite fear. Holmes studies him for several minutes before speaking. You worked at Gelder & Co., the sculptors, he says. Modeling busts before your sudden dismissal. What changed? Beppo shrugs. I have no quarrel with Napoleon, he says in accented English. But I do not like prisons, and I do not like policemen. Holmes's tone is mild. Yet you seem determined to visit both repeatedly. Beppo only grins. Holmes stands. Curious fellow. Lestrade, when did you say he was arrested? 3 nights ago. Then the 7th bust, Holmes murmurs, is still intact. We must find it before Beppo's friends do. You spend the next day following Holmes through a labyrinth of London's less-traveled streets, shops of curiosities, pawnbrokers, second-hand dealers. He moves like a bloodhound on the scent, his coat flaring behind him, his gaze fixed always one step beyond the visible world. At last, in a small shop on Kennington Road, you find it. The final bust of Napoleon, identical to the rest, perched high on a shelf between a chipped teapot and a jar of marbles. The shopkeeper is delighted to sell it for a few shillings. Holmes insists on carrying it himself. Fragile thing, he murmurs. History always is. Back at Baker Street, he lays it on the table and regards it as though it might breathe. Then, with sudden precision, he strikes it with a poker. The plaster cracks neatly in 2. Inside, something glints. Holmes kneels, parting the fragments, and lifts from within a small black pearl the size of a fingernail, gleaming like a drop of midnight. The black pearl of the Borgias, he says softly. Stolen weeks ago from the Countess of Morcar's collection. Hidden by our friend Beppo in the wet plaster while it set. He intended to retrieve it later, but was arrested before the busts shipped. Hence his frantic destruction of each, hoping to reclaim the one that held his fortune. Lestrade stares. Good Lord, all this for a pearl? Holmes replaces the gem gently on the table. Men have waged wars for less. That evening, as the fog rises once more over London, Holmes sits by the fire, polishing the recovered pearl between his fingers. A small thing, he says. Yet men died for it. The irony never fades. You smile faintly. And what of Beppo? He'll hang, I expect. Holmes replies. But not for breaking statues. For breaking patience. He pauses, setting the pearl beside his pipe. Strange, isn't it? We spend our lives chasing the extraordinary. Yet it's the ordinary that hides the real treasures. A lump of plaster, a forgotten shop window. How thin the veil between banality and brilliance. You nod, watching the pearl catch the firelight, its surface pulsing like a living thing. You sound almost philosophical, you say. Philosophy, Holmes muses, is what one invents when the cases run out. Historians often point to the adventure of the 6 Napoleons as the height of Holmes's detective craft. Proof that his genius thrived as much on the trivial as the grand. But to those who knew him, it marked something else. A rare flicker of empathy. Later that night, when Lestrade returned to retrieve the pearl for the yard, you caught Holmes lingering over the broken fragments on the table. He didn't seem to see them as evidence, but as relics. Pieces of some quiet human tragedy too small for newspapers to print. He noticed you watching and smiled faintly. We call them criminals, Watson, but half of them are merely men who chose the wrong hiding place. You laughed softly. And what would you call yourself? He considered. A man who hides in plain sight. Outside, the fog pressed closer, wrapping the city in its eternal shroud. Inside, the clock ticked, the fire whispered, and Holmes sat lost in thought. Half legend, half man, his reflection flickering like a ghost in the window glass. You realized then that he was both the pearl and the plaster. Brilliance trapped inside something brittle, fragile, human, and perhaps you thought that was what made him so endlessly worth finding. The case of the 6 Napoleons fades into memory like a ripple on water. For a few blessed weeks, 221B Baker Street is quiet again. No telegrams at dawn, no frantic knocks on the door, no cigar ash smeared across the Persian rug. Holmes spends his mornings in silence, rearranging chemical samples with monk-like focus, and his evenings lost in violin improvisations that sound halfway between a lullaby and a confession. You, ever the chronicler, almost begin to believe the calm will last. But peace, in Holmes's world, is never an ending. It is only the breath between storms. The new Tempest arrives as a letter, postmarked from Dartmoor. The handwriting is bold and elegant, the paper thick enough to smell faintly of wealth. Mr. Holmes, my family is haunted, not by superstition, as my neighbors claim, but by something far more real. My friend Dr. Mortimer will explain the particulars. I implore you to come to Devonshire at once. My name is Sir Henry Baskerville. Holmes lowers the letter slowly, eyes glittering with interest. Haunted by something real, he murmurs. You hear the contradiction, Watson? The best kind of puzzle always begins with one. By the time Dr. Mortimer arrives that afternoon, the fog outside has turned the city to smoke. He's a nervous man. Tall, thin, his hands shaking as he unfolds an old parchment on the table. This, he says, was written by Sir Charles Baskerville before his death. Holmes leans forward as the doctor reads aloud. Know that there is a curse upon our line, born of the wicked Hugo Baskerville, whose cruelty summoned from the moor a great hound of hell. Beware the moor, and especially its night sounds, for the beast still howls for blood. You can't help but smile at the Gothic melodrama, but Mortimer's voice trembles. Sir Charles was found dead 3 months ago, near the yew alley. His face, God forgive me, was twisted in terror. There were footprints beside him, enormous, paw prints. Holmes's expression doesn't change, but his fingers drum once on the table. And now Sir Henry, the heir, receives this warning. He picks up a second paper, newly creased, unsigned. If you value your life, keep away from the moor. The detective's gaze flicks toward you. Watson, I think the air of Devon will do us both good. 2 days later, the London fog gives way to the wide, desolate expanse of Dartmoor. The sky hangs low and gray, the ground stretching into endless heather and bog. The wind smells of peat and something older, even before the carriage stops at Baskerville Hall. You understand why the locals whisper about curses. The place seems made for them. The hall looms out of the mist. Ancient stone, turrets like fists raised against the sky. Inside, the corridors smell of dust and melancholy. Sir Henry Baskerville, though young and spirited, can't quite dispel the shadow that clings to the place. Holmes, unusually, doesn't linger. I must return to London, he tells you that evening. Pressing affairs. He gives you a long, unreadable look. Keep your eyes open, Watson. Trust no man until we know his music. You realize too late that you've been volunteered as both detective and bait. The days that follow blur into damp mornings and long, uneasy nights. The moor stretches outside the window like an ocean of fog. Strange sounds carry across it, low, mournful cries that set your nerves on edge. Sir Henry grows restless. The servants whisper prayers, and somewhere in that endless gray, you feel the unseen eyes of something or someone watching. It's during one of your solitary walks that you find it. A patch of mud by the Grimpen mire, marked with a single, enormous paw print. The sight stops your breath cold. You crouch, tracing it with your cane. The print is deep, fresh, impossibly large. When you return to the hall, Sir Henry looks at your face and goes pale. You saw it too, didn't you? He says. The Hound. That night, the howling comes again. Closer this time, rolling across the moor like thunder. Weeks pass before Holmes reveals that he never left Devon at all. He appears one fog-shrouded morning from the ruins of a stone hut on the moor, gaunt and smiling. Forgive the deception, Watson, he says. But an experiment requires observation unclouded by friendship. I needed to see how the pieces moved without interference. He listens as you recount every detail. Sir Henry's nightly walks, the shadowed stranger lurking on the moor, the candle signal flashing from the hill. Excellent, Holmes says. We are closing the net. Tonight, it ends. The final act unfolds beneath a moon choked by fog. You and Holmes crouch behind a boulder, revolvers ready, watching the path that leads from Baskerville Hall. Sir Henry walks alone, brave and unsuspecting, his lantern a faint star in the gloom. Then it comes, a sound so unearthly it freezes the blood. A howl, deep and terrible, rising from the mire. The creature bursts through the mist. A massive hound, black as pitch, its muzzle glistening with phosphorus that makes it glow like something born of nightmare. It lunges for Sir Henry. Your shot rings out, followed by Holmes's. The beast collapses, skidding across the heather. The smell of burning chemicals fills the air. Holmes kneels beside it, eyes cold with triumph. A dog of flesh, not of hell, he says softly. Coated with luminous paint to give it fire. Terrifying, yes. Supernatural, never. He stands, calling into the darkness. Come out, Stapleton. The game's over. A figure emerges from the fog. Thin, sharp-featured, eyes wild with fury. The schoolmaster turned naturalist, Sir Henry's neighbor. The last of the Baskervilles by blood, though born illegitimate. You can't prove it, he hisses. On the contrary, Holmes says, lifting a paper. Your boot prints on the moor, your wife's confession, and now, your beast. Stapleton flees into the mist. Hours later, they find his body half sunk in the Grimpen mire, the bog closing over him like a grave. When you return to Baker Street, the city feels impossibly small after the vast, haunted moor. Holmes drops his travel bag on the floor, stretches like a cat, and says simply, "A fine holiday." You stare at him. You call that a holiday? He smiles. Every landscape is improved by a little deduction. Later that night, as the fire crackles and the rain whispers against the glass, Holmes grows uncharacteristically quiet. You know, Watson, he says, the human mind is much like the moor. Foggy, treacherous, and full of unexpected depths. But once the mist clears, one finds there is always solid ground beneath. You nod, and yet some men never find it. He doesn't answer. The flames dance in his eyes. For a long moment, the two of you sit in silence. Just the ticking of the clock, the soft hum of the city below, and the faint echo of a hound's distant howl lingering somewhere at the edge of memory. Holmes finally breaks the stillness with a sigh. One must pity the superstitious, Watson. They fear devils because they cannot face men. Then, as though the words have lifted some invisible weight. He smiles faintly. Now, where did I put that violin? Historians later called The Hound of the Baskervilles the greatest of Holmes's adventures. A masterpiece of terror and logic intertwined. But for you, the true memory of it is quieter. The glow of the hearth after the storm. The sound of Holmes tuning his violin in the half-light. And the knowledge that for every beast lurking in the world, there is still one mind sharp enough to face it without flinching. Outside, London's fog curls once more around the lamplight, soft and endless. Inside, the violin sings, and the world, for now, feels safe again. Spring comes back to London with its usual gray indecision. Rain one moment, weak sunshine the next. In the streets, hansom cabs hiss over wet cobblestones, and the air smells of damp wool and river mist. You think Holmes might finally rest after the affair of the Baskervilles, but the man has never understood the meaning of rest. For weeks, he busies himself in small experiments, testing gunpowder residues, charting the curve of handwriting under stress, even timing how long it takes a housefly to traverse his chemistry bench. You know, these are his ways of keeping boredom at bay. That dangerous abyss where his mind begins to devour itself. Then, one morning in August, as you're finishing your tea, he appears in the doorway with a telegram in hand and that familiar gleam behind his eyes. The one that always means trouble. "Pack light," he says. "This one concerns the nation." You blink. The nation? Holmes nods. A spy ring, a code hidden in a German dispatch, and an appointment by the sea. "Watson, tonight we travel to Sussex. It may be my last case." You laugh uneasily, but the words settle in your chest like a weight. By dusk you reach the coast, where the sea spreads black and gleaming under the moon. The village is small, half cottages, half salt wind. In one of them waits a man you recognize only from newspapers. Von Bork, the foreign agent whose name has been whispered in every corridor of Whitehall. Holmes has disguised himself again, of course. This time as an amiable Irish horse trainer with the smell of whiskey and saddle soap. You follow his lead, pretending to be his dull companion. The plan is simple, as Holmes explains while you wait behind a sand dune watching the tide creep in. He expects to purchase a set of coded naval signals from an English trader. Instead, he will purchase his own undoing. You nod. And the trader? Holmes smiles. In custody already. What Von Bork meets tonight is my forgery. He checks his watch. 10 minutes to midnight. The house is dark when you approach. Inside, lamplight flickers through heavy curtains. Holmes knocks in a strange pattern. 3 quick, 1 slow. The door opens, and a tall, sharp-featured man greets him with a smile that doesn't touch his eyes. "Ah, Altamont," Von Bork says, the name Holmes has chosen for his disguise. "You are punctual. You have the documents?" "Safe and sound," Holmes replies in a broad accent. "But first, the payment." Von Bork gestures toward a heavy case on the table. £4,000, as agreed. The future of England in that envelope, yes? Holmes places a sealed packet in his hands. The future, the present, and the past, if you like. The spy chuckles, slipping it open, and freezes. Inside is not paper, but a single blank sheet and a small card that reads simply, "Sherlock Holmes sends his compliments." Before Von Bork can react, Holmes moves. One swift motion, no violence, just precision. The man staggers backward, bound before he understands what's happening. Outside, the sea roars approval. Holmes straightens his cuffs, utterly calm. "You see, my dear Von Bork," he says, "there are only 2 kinds of game in this world. The kind played on boards and the kind played in minds. You have been a pawn far too long." He turns to you. "Fetch the police, Watson." Hours later, as dawn pinks the horizon, you sit together on the cliffside watching the tide roll in. Holmes looks older in the gray light, though the lines on his face are softened by something like peace. "You meant it," you say quietly. "This is your last case." He nods. "I've given the government enough puzzles to keep them busy for years. The rest of my life, I intend to spend on quieter matters." You smile. "Beekeeping, perhaps?" He glances sideways, amused. "Ah, so you remember my idle dreams." "Yes, bees are honest creatures. They sting when necessary, but never out of malice. An admirable society." You sit in silence for a while, listening to the waves. "Do you ever regret it?" you ask finally. "The years chasing shadows?" Holmes leans back, eyes half closed. "Regret? No. Fatigue, perhaps. I've seen too much of what men will do for greed or pride. But I have also seen, thanks to you, that the world still contains loyalty, courage, friendship. Those, I find, are rarer than diamonds." You look at him, surprised by the softness in his voice. "Holmes, that almost sounds like sentiment." He chuckles. "Then let's call it observation." He retires soon after to a small cottage near the sea. Stone walls, a garden full of lavender. Hives lined up like soldiers in the sun. You visit sometimes, bringing him books or newspapers he pretends not to read. The great detective has become the great recluse, content to measure his days in honey and silence. And yet, even there, the world finds him. War looms on the horizon, and one autumn morning, he appears at your door in full coat and hat, the old fire rekindled in his eyes. "The country calls again, Watson," he says, "but this time not for deduction, for defense." And so you accompany him once more. This time not into fog or murder, but into history. August 1914, the eve of the Great War. You find yourselves in a cold room overlooking the channel, documents spread across a table. Holmes bent over them with fierce precision. Von Bork's capture has led to a dozen arrests, the unmasking of spies across Europe. But even now, he works not for glory, but for necessity. Silent, exact, relentless. When at last he leans back, satisfied, you see something different in him. Not triumph, but closure. "Well," he says softly, "I believe that concludes my business with the world." You raise your glass. "To retirement, then." He smiles. "To peace, though I doubt we'll live to see much of it." And that brings us to tonight. You sit by the fire, older now, the city far behind you. The waves murmur outside. In the next room, Holmes moves quietly, tending to his bees, whistling a tune that drifts through the doorway. Something familiar, half forgotten. He returns at last, wiping his hands on a towel, and takes the chair beside you. The years have thinned him, but his eyes are still sharp, bright as candlelight. "Strange thing, Watson," he says, speaking to you, but also somehow to everyone listening through time. After all the crimes, the chases, the riddles, it's not the solutions I remember. It's the silences between them. The moments after truth is found, when the world holds its breath and the chaos stops. Those are the real victories. You nod, feeling the warmth of the fire and the deeper warmth of friendship. "You think the world will remember you, Holmes?" He smiles faintly. "If it does, I hope it remembers that deduction is nothing without imagination, and that logic, to mean anything, must still make room for wonder. Outside, the wind turns. The tide withdraws. The night stretches on." Holmes leans back, eyes half closed, as though listening to some distant rhythm only he can hear. For once, his voice is almost gentle. "The game, my dear friend, is never truly over. It simply changes its board." And with that, he falls silent, content, complete, the great machine of his mind at rest. Wind down. final 300 words. The fire sinks lower, the coals whispering like fading conversation. You listen to the hush that follows, a silence thick with memory. Outside, the sea sighs, and the bees in their hives settle into sleep. You close your eyes and see it all again. London's fog curling through gaslight, the glint of a magnifying glass, the violin's soft ache at midnight, the knock at Baker Street's door, the smell of tobacco, the calm certainty in Holmes's voice when the world seemed hopelessly tangled. He is gone now. Or perhaps simply beyond the next case, the next mystery, the next bend in time. But his presence lingers like a trace of smoke. The reminder that intellect can be kind, that reason can coexist with wonder, that friendship, above all, is the one deduction that never fails. You breathe in the quiet, feeling the weight of years lift. The night outside is endless, but it feels gentle now, less like darkness and more like a promise. The last ember glows, pulses once, and dims. The violin's final note still hums in your memory, soft as a heartbeat. And as sleep draws near, you imagine the door of Baker Street opening once more. The familiar voice saying, "Come, Watson, the game is afoot." Only this time, it's an invitation to rest.